reading from the Buddha as written in the Dhammapada. The world does not know that we must all come to an end here, but those who know it, their quarrels end at once. And from the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, called the Synoptic Gospels, you may have gotten a copy of that in your order service. If not, perhaps someone near you has. This is a photocopy from an interesting book that those of you who are interested in a little bit of Bible study might want to get. It's called Gospel Parallels. And it has all the Gospels, at least the three synoptic. The three synoptic are Matthew, Mark, and Luke. They're called synoptic because syn means together, like synagogue or synthetic, and optic means to see. So they see Jesus' life pretty much the same. The Gospel of John has almost nothing in common with the first three Gospels. But it is interesting when you look at the same story, which I'm going to read from, and I'm going to skip around in parts. But it's interesting to see their differences. Some are slight, some are not so slight. And in fact, when it's time for after the service, when people kind of have social hour, coffee hour, if any of you are interested, just bring your sheet of paper with you and at whatever table I'm at, and we can discuss it a little bit, because it's kind of an interesting Bible lesson, especially this particular passage. Okay, from Matthew 19, Mark 10, and Luke 18, what they have in common. And behold, a man came up to Jesus, it could be someone or a man or a ruler, asking him, "Teacher, what good deed should I do in order to have eternal life?" And Jesus says, "Keep the commandments." And the young man says, "Well, which ones?" And Jesus lists the ones he thinks are important. Don't kill, commit adultery, do not steal, do not bear false witness, do not defraud, honor your father and mother. And in the Matthew version, he adds the summary commandment, love your neighbor as yourself. And the young man says, "All of these I have observed from my youth." And Jesus said, "You lack only one thing. Go and sell what you have and give to the poor. Then you will have a heavenly treasure. And come, follow me." And when the young man heard this, his face fell, and he went away sad, for he had great possessions. Now the story I told, the children's story that was actually for the kids and small kids, talked about the story I told kids is common to at least 4 different traditions with minor variations. The Hindus, of course, have said elephant represents God. You have the idea of being no one really knows what God is. To Jains, it represents truth because no one has the whole picture. To Buddhists, it represents the futility of trying to figure out a lot of philosophical matters. And the great Islamic mystic Rumi said the elephant parable is meant to tell us to not be too proud of what we think we know. So the parable of the blind people and the elephant can be about God, or truth, or humility, or the futility of theology and speculation. But think of it. At least half of the world has been exposed, at least indirectly, to this story. And they may not have all heard the story. How many of you have heard something about the elephant, the blind man? All right. They may not have all heard the story, but they belong to religions that teach the story. Just as the story of Abraham and his willingness to sacrifice his son is common to half of the world too, since it's a linchpin in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Well, there's another story, again with slightly different interpretations, but that's become a part of even more religions than the elephant story or the Abraham story. But to prepare you for it, I need to tell you about Mohandas, Martin, mice, and manatees. I hope you'll find this little road trip enlightening over that. So let's start with Mohandas, as in Mohandas Gandhi. Better known most of us as Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma is just Mahatma, great soul. So it's a title given to him, just as Christ meant Messiah or Mashiach, anointed one. Jesus wasn't the son of Mr. and Mrs. Christ. I always explain that. So Mahatma Gandhi, he wasn't known as Mahatma by his mother. He was called that later. The first thing I want to say about Gandhi is that he didn't start out as this great saint who wanted to save the world. He started out as an Indian law school student in London. He was what we would now call a young urban professional. And although he is now claimed as a kind of Hindu saint, he had at that time pretty much given up on his Hindu religion. But he began reading the writings of a Russian novelist, who we will hear about later, about Christian love and nonviolence. And he was very moved by that. After he graduated from law school, he left London for South Africa, where he didn't plan to stay long, just to help settle a lawsuit there between two Indian firms. But after he arrived, he found that because of his dark skin, people thought he was black. And when the conductor on the train he was riding found out he was riding in the white section, he ordered him to move to the back of the train. Gandhi refused, so they threw him out, and he ended up having to spend the night at a train station. Rather unfortunate experience for Gandhi, except that it turned out to be a fortunate one for us, because that experience helped Gandhi understand personally what it meant to feel discrimination. And it made him decide to stay in South Africa instead of returning to India right away. So he ended up staying in South Africa for 21 years, achieving the passage of the Indian Relief Act before he left. And then he went back to India to work for the rights of people in his own country. But enough about Gandhi for now. Let's get to Martin, as in Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. As some of you may know, Dr. King got his idea of nonviolent resistance from Gandhi. Before that, he thought that the Christian ethic of turning the other cheek, meeting violence with peace, he thought maybe that was okay for one-on-one relationships, but it would never work for a political mass movement. But after seeing what Gandhi was doing in India, and then after reading Gandhi's books, Dr. King realized that nonviolent resistance could change the world. So this Christian minister, Martin Luther King, got his idea of nonviolence from a Hindu, Mohandas Gandhi. Now I hope my thoughts work. All right, here we go. All right. Whoops. You're not supposed to roll. Well, we'll let him see. Now, before we get to mice and Manichees, I got to bring up someone whose name doesn't start with an M. That's Tolstoy. That's why I didn't include him in the title. But he's just as important to our story. And that person would be Leo Tolstoy, the Russian novelist who wrote Anna Karenina and War and Peace. Now, after Tolstoy wrote these novels, he became a rather wealthy and famous writer, but he had a spiritual crisis in his life. And it led him to give up his property and try to live as one of the poor. And he advocated a philosophy of nonviolence. And do you know what it is that changed his life? This is where the mice come in. Although Tolstoy had been dissatisfied with his life of wealth and comfort for some time, the thing that crystallized it all for him, the thing that galvanized him to change his life, was a story or parable from the lives of the saints. This is a story about a man who is fleeing from a grisly beast, and in his haste trips and falls down into a well. Lucky for him, the beast can't follow him into the well, so he appears to be safe at first, but unlucky for him, there's a dragon at the bottom of the well, with his mouth open, waiting for the man to fall into it. But, lucky for the man, there's a bush growing out of the side of the well, and he grabs onto it just in time to keep from falling in the dragon's mouth. So there's a beast at the top of the well, waiting to eat him if he tries to get out. There's a dragon at the bottom, waiting to eat him if he falls down. The bush is the only thing that's saving him. But he looks at the bush, and he sees two mice nibbling away at the mouse. One mouse is white, one is black. One represents day, one represents night. They go round and round the well, eating a little more of the bush at each revolution. The man knows that the bush will eventually give away, and he will fall and die. And the bush, by the way, represents wealth and fame, which tastes sweet at first, but eventually loses its flavor. And as time passes through each day and night, eventually we almost die, and you can't think of it. That is the parable that changed Tolstoy's life, and is told in the lives of the saints, in the account of Saints Larsen and Josaphat. Josaphat, as it happens, was an Indian prince with much wealth and power. He had heard the preaching of St. Larsen, a monk from the Sinai Desert, and he converted to Christianity and then gave up his throne to go off into the wilderness to find God. So, it's a story reminding us that life is short, and there's no sense in gathering up fame and fortune because you have to give it all to the end. And this story changed Tolstoy's life. As an aside, the gospel story that had that effect on me was the one I read a couple minutes ago, where the young man or ruler asks Jesus about eternal life. It says he's kept the commandments from his youth. And it says in the Mark version that Jesus, looking upon him, loved him. I really like that. That's one really interesting difference there. Jesus, looking on him, loved him and said to him, "You lack only one thing. Go and sell what you have and give it to the poor. And you'll have treasure in heaven. Come follow me." And when the young man heard this, he went away, for he owned so much. That saying, for me at least, made a big difference in my life. Not that I gave everything I had before. I didn't go quite that far, but I made sure that charitable giving was a much higher priority in my life. In fact, I can say that the last 50 years of my life, it's significantly different than they would have otherwise been because of that particular gospel message. Anyway, for Tolstoy, this particular story about the lives of the saints, about the man in the well, had a very similar impact on his life. Not only that, but because of the fame he already had, his change in lifestyle had a tremendous effect on thousands of other people in his day. His eloquence in speaking of love and nonviolence attracted many followers, and disciples began organizing colonies where they tried to live communally and follow his precepts. And one of the people influenced by him was Gandhi, who started a community near Johannesburg, which he called Tolstoy Farm. Now, I don't know if Gandhi was familiar with the actual story from the lives of the saints, but he was certainly influenced by someone who was. And you know what? This Christian story from the lives of the saints that Tolstoy wrote and read in Russian came from an earlier Greek version, which was the basis of a Latin version, which was the basis of Czech and Polish versions, and Italian, Spanish, French, and German versions, and Swedish and Norwegian versions too. There was even a translation into Icelandic as early as 1204. So the medieval Christian consciousness was formed in no small way by this little parable. And the Greek version, the original Greek version, was for a long time thought to have been written by the great John of Damascus. Now we know it was produced by a Georgian monk in the 11th century who got it from a simpler Georgian monk in the 9th century. But it turns out that this version So this Christian parable, this came from an Arabic version that was being circulated by Muslims years before. So this Christian parable that indirectly changed so many lives was originally an Islamic story. Isn't that amazing? Tolstoy got his inspiration to be a better Christian from a Muslim parable. He experienced a Christian conversion through a bit of Islamic spirituality. But you know, that Christian parable, which was really Islamic, became Jewish too. Abraham Ben Hasdai from Barcelona, Spain, produced a Hebrew version of the story from the Arabic one, which then spread through the Jewish world. It was even translated into Yiddish in the 19th century. So, a Jewish and Christian story based on an Islamic story. But you know what? The Muslims didn't make up the story either. They got it in Central Asia from the Manichees, an ancient religion that challenged Christianity in the 3rd century and seemed at one time to be on the verge of becoming one of the world's most successful religions. The Manichees were a religion founded by a man named Mani, who was born in Persia in the year 215, was crucified in 276, just like Jesus a couple hundred years before. Like the Zoroastrians and the Mithra religions before him, Mani emphasized the war between the forces of darkness and light. That's why if you hear the word Manichean today, it means dualistic, contrast, or conflict between opposites. Anyway, Mani got his religious theory from the Zoroastrians, his beliefs from the Babylonians, his ethics from the Buddhists, and his holy names from the Christians. A pretty interesting amalgamated religion that you probably never heard of, because it disappeared centuries ago. But at the time when Christianity was about to become the official religion of the Roman Empire, the Manichees were probably its strongest competitors. So just think, if Emperor Constantine hadn't decided to make Christianity the official religion of his empire, we might be Manichees today. Of course, in this church, we'd be very liberal and reformed Manichees. Anyway, the Manichee religion lasted for nearly 1,000 years. It was Christianity's toughest competitor. And St. Augustine, by the way, who was probably the most important church father in Christian history, was a Manichee for 9 years before converting to Christianity. But you know what? The story is not original with the Manichees either. They got it from the Buddhists. And that shouldn't surprise you too much. I know that Kay has mentioned that she's been doing world religion studies with some of the congregation. So that's why I picked this sermon. Anyway, they got it from the Buddhists, which shouldn't surprise you too much when you recall that the Buddha was a wealthy prince who gave up his worldly possessions and power to go out in search of enlightenment. The Larsen and Josaphat story is fundamentally the story of Buddha's search for enlightenment. As a matter of fact, there's a special word in Buddhism for a person who's on the road to becoming a Buddha. That word is bodhisattva, which means Buddha to be. Bodhisattva, if you look up here, bodhisattva became bodhisatv in the Manichee versions. Then it became Buddhisatv in Arabic, and Josaphat in Greek, and Josaphat in Latin, or as we pronounce it in English, Josaphat, who has a great big church named after him in Milwaukee. And if you ever visit this church, remember that St. Josaphat, the prince in India from the lives of the saints who became a Christian, was originally a bodhisattva, a prince in India who became a Buddha. Incidentally, the Zen Buddhist version of his fable, in that one, the bush the man holds on to is a strawberry bush, and he sees one strawberry, and he takes it and eats it, and no strawberry ever tasted so good. And the idea of being living in the here and the now is not very good. Okay, time for the so what test. So what difference does the neighbors make? Well, one lesson from all this is that all religions borrow from each other. No religion develops in a vacuum. They're all interdependent. And it's not that they're saying all exactly the same things, because they're not. But they do have some common themes. The golden rule, for example, is common in every major religion. Treat others the way you want to be treated. But also this message from the guy caught in the well. Knowing that you come from nothing and you won't live forever, what do you do in the time between? As the Buddhist Dhammapada told us in the earlier reading, the world does not know that we must all come to an end here. But those who know it, their quarrels stop at last. The other message I get from all this is that people and stories influence each other across continents and centuries. Hindus to Buddhists, Zoroastrians to Jews, Jews to Christians, to Manichees, to Muslims, to Sikhs, Baha'i, we're all interconnected. People who may have never even met each other would have been touched by a common kindness, inspired by a common sentiment, moved by a common compassion, a kind of unity in diversity. I can give you a few other examples of religions borrowing from each other. The Roman Catholic use of rosary beads for prayer, for instance. When I was a kid, we did one of those. Christians got the idea from the Muslims during the Crusades, and many Muslims still use beads, especially the Sufi sect. The Muslims in turn got their beads from the Hindus, who also gave them to the Buddhists and the Jains, and eventually the Sikhs. Or if you look at the calendar we use today, the days of the week are named after Norse gods. The number of days of the week is from the Jews. The names of the months are for Roman gods. The years are calculated back to the birth of Jesus. And then the numerals we use for the days and years are Arabic and come from the Muslims, who originally got them from the Hindus. By the way, the Buddhists actually got the story of the man in the well from either the Jains or the Hindus. I think I have it on here. Let's see. Yep. So it went from being Jain and Hindu to being Buddhist, then Manichean, then Islamic, and then Jewish and Christian. And then when you consider that one of Gandhi's most noted disciples was Martin Luther King, you see that we've gone from Hindu and Jain to Buddhist to Manichaean to Muslim to Jew and Christian, back to Hindu, and then back to Christian. And you know, when I look at my life, and I see how easy it is to get caught up in the material benefits that life has to offer, I do sometimes think about those mice that are gnawing away at my life. And I realize that life is limited, and you can't take it with you. And I have a story told by Muslims and Manichees to remind me of that. A story told by Jews and Jains, Hindus and Buddhists, in good old Christian St. Josaphat. And now you have the story too. And it may be that this could be a time for you, as it is for me, to look at our lives, which those mice are gnawing away at every moment, and say, this bush I'm hanging on to won't last forever. What is left then is to worry less about the bush and more about how to serve my fellow beings, to get a balance between my material needs and my spiritual growth. For to be rich in things of the Spirit, I may have to sometimes give up things of the world. You know, there's an old story, I'll close with this. There's an old story of a king who was suffering from an illness. And he was advised by his astrologer that he could be cured if they could find the coat of a satisfied person and bring it to him to wear. So people went out to all parts of the kingdom searching for such a person. And after a long search, they finally found a truly satisfied person. The only problem was that person didn't have a coat. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.